To almost every single one of us, melody is the most important aspect of all music. And yet, what on earth is it? As we've already covered, rhythm is the basic component of our musical universe, the first dimension of musical sounds. Next comes melody. You see, rhythm divides time up into repetitious intervals, but melody adds the extra dimension of pitch. So rhythm defines how long or short a note is, but melody how long and short it is and whether it goes up or down. So melody contains more musical information than rhythm. Take our famous... The rhythm is expressed by... But when we add pitch, we can now add notes. Now the sound starts but ends up lower. The music has gained in character and personality. What's more, we now have an answering phrase at a different pitch. Now the music is in dialogue. Now so much more has been added to the musical space. Like rhythm, our reaction to melody is often instinctive. If rhythm takes us back to before we are born, melody takes us back to our childhood. We first hear melodies sung to us as children. These early melodies are often the first things we hear and are some of the earliest sounds we ourselves articulate.
Only me.
Melody gives us our voice. It creates a personal language. If rhythm belongs to the formation of our body, melody belongs to the formation of our minds and our hearts. A melody, by definition, represents a single voice. The word itself comes from the ancient Greek, melos, which defines the singing or chanting of poetry. A single string of notes, a melody. If you add more notes at the same time, you get harmony, or disharmony, depending on which notes you pick. But you can only sing with one voice, your own. That singular aspect of melody tells us something about our very personal relationship to it. Melodies beguile us or haunt us. They make us feel happy or sad. They make us relate to music, connect with it personally. Rhythm makes us move, but melody moves us. It makes us feel. Rhythm connects with our body, melody connects with our heart. That's why we, like the ancient Greeks, so often enjoy melodies paired with lyrics in the form of songs. The lyrics cements that emotional bond between us and the music, whether it's White Christmas or Yesterday. A particular sequence of pitch and spacing of notes carries us immediately into an emotional space and answers some deep need within us. Never knew the melody, as Tom Waits sings it,
until I needed the song.
Like rhythm, our reaction to melody is often instinctive. You may not know how a diminished seventh sounds, but I bet you know the sound of a good tune. It's the gold for which songwriters spend their lives mining. That simple clutch of notes that somehow sounds as if they've always existed naturally together. Edelweiss, Edelweiss. Take Edelweiss from The Sound of Music. People usually assume it's a traditional Austrian folk song, and that's because Rodgers and Hammerstein penned an instantly memorable tune. It may sound as old as the hills, but even by the time the music was filmed in 1965, the tune was the same age as Gretel, the youngest of the Von Trapp brood. A melody is a collection of notes, but not just any notes. I've always thought Unchained Melody is a curious name for a song, since a melody is actually something like a chain. A sequence of notes that link together to produce a unified musical phrase that sounds pleasing to our ears. Each note in a melody is linked to the other. A chain of notes goes by a lot of names. A voice, phrase, line, air, theme, strain, melody, or even good old tune. Melodies stand out immediately when we listen to music. They're the first thing our ears lock onto, consciously at least. It's also the bit we're most likely to remember afterwards.
Melody, remember me.
We share a very personal relationship to melody. So deep is that relationship that sometimes we can't get our tune out of our head, even when we want to. We get earwormed, that annoying advertising jingle or pop tune that keeps replaying itself unasked for in your head, and that tells us something instinctive is happening, as we often find when we consider music. You see, melodies catch hold of our thought processes, even hijacking them. They no doubt ape those thought processes themselves. Melodies are like thoughts. It's yet another indication of how close the relationship is between us and music. Rhythm's got a grip on our body, whilst melody takes hold of our mind. All of this at an instinctive or unconscious level.
So really, you ain't gonna hit me back.
The melody is the part of music that sings out to us. It's the main tune. It's the part of the music we would sing if we wanted to show someone else what the music was. And that's a good way to think of melody as the voice of a piece of music. Melodies are easy to pick out in pop music. It's the thing the lead singer is singing. But with classical music, it can be a harder process. A tricky game of hunt the tune. Let's take this very famous example. Tchaikovsky's First Piano Concerto. And that really has what my son might describe as a banging tune. First played by the orchestra, then repeated with a little variation by the piano. And then played by the orchestra once more. And then that's it. For the remaining 15 minutes of the first movement, 15 minutes, you never hear the tune again. When I first started listening to classical music, I often struggled with this. I'd latch onto a part of the music I recognised and loved, but before long it had gone, transformed or got lost amongst everything else. Now, right at the start of the same piano concerto, you get another melody of just 4 notes. But those 4 notes can grow into an entire movement. You can't really call those 4 notes a tune, and yet this theme is worked in far more ways by Tchaikovsky. In other words, it can often be our expectation of what a melody should be that makes classical music sound confusing to a new listener. A good tune isn't the final aim of classical music, though there is no doubt it produces lots of great ones. A tune is a short and memorable melody, but in musical terms a tune is finite and closed. The melody has been in a sense completed. It works as a tune. It can now be repeated and repeated. Which is how an effective tune works. Classical music tends towards melodies which can transform and develop. A melody may start out as a simple germ or idea, but it can grow into an entire movement, and if you're not used to this, it can make classical music rather frustrating to follow. There's also an issue of density. With classical music, melodies are often harder to discern amongst everything else that's going on, and then so often, just when you've picked out a melody, the music bounces off somewhere else, slipping out of your grasp like a slippery eel. A melody is not always where we expect it. Wagner's a great example of this. I always think when you want to hear the melody in his work, you have to listen to the orchestra and not the singers, which is counterintuitive. Take for example the amazing climax to Tristan and Isolde. If you want to hear the real music singing, you don't have to listen to the singer, you have to listen to the strings and the orchestra, because that's where it's happening. Let's turn to one of the most famous tunes in all classical music. The chorale of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. It's a relatively simple melody, but it goes through a lot of work over 20 minutes of the finale. That's the melody played by the orchestra. Now let's hear it sung.
Wir betreten Feuer trunken
Okay, now let's hear it sung by more people. The melody is being changed and transformed, but it's still recognisably the same tune. Now let's hear it again a bit later, being transformed even more. Now the melody transformed into a military march, and notice you hear it in the orchestra, not the singer. And now the melody turned into a complicated fugue. You see, sometimes a melody can be laid over a different melody, or over itself but at different points, which is what a fugue is. This concentrated yet fluid presentation of melody can make classical music tricky to listen to, especially if you're just used to pop music, where melodies come at regular and predictable points, verse and chorus, and they don't deviate from one chorus to the next. Classical music has more than its fair share of tunes, but expect variation, multi-layering, and plenty of melodic development. And remember, this doesn't make it more difficult or more complicated, it makes it more fun.